Now we can actually look at a few other. So let's look at manage field stage first. We have already spoken about manage field stage. So we saw, let me log in first. Okay, so did I speak about manage fields? No. So let's look at, today is 27. Okay, so manage fields. When we did our files the other day, we saw that we were not able to do a join, right? Because the field
Yes.
types were different. And for that, we added the manage field stage. So one purpose of the manage field stage is that it allows you to change your field types, right? Or change the field names. Okay, but in addition to that, manage fields stage has a other very important function. So let's first write that down. So the purpose of manage field stage is, so use the manage field stage to basically select fields, to edit fields, and most important, view field changes. So manage field stage, we were able to edit our fields, right? So if I can go back to the data catalog. Okay, so if I look at this data catalog, we created this derived data set, right? And in this derived data set, if I view this in a new tab, and also in the meantime, if I look at the lineage. Hmm, this is taking a while. Okay, let's edit this. And let's also look at the lineage where we are. Okay, so if you
Is
see, we added this manage field stage. And the purpose of this
I'm
manage
sorry,
field,
is that Jan 5 version? Did we create that, or you are showing me some different derived data set?
right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that is fine.
Okay, okay, got
And what do we need? We
it.
need,
Feb 7, yeah.
okay, okay, okay. I should be removing the other ones. Thank you. Okay, but any which ways, view in a new tab. This is, we don't need base data set. We need derived data set. And DDS 02. Okay. And DDS 03. So what all are we checking? We are checking DDS 03. Let's edit this and also look at the lineage. Okay, so if you see, we created our manage field stage, right? And what was the purpose for adding this manage field stage? Basically to edit the field types,
Yes.
right? And in terms of editing the fields, what all options do we have? We can edit the field type and we can also edit the field name, right? Okay, but in addition to this, it can also be used to select fields and view field changes. So let's come back. I'll cancel this. So this is, oh, has someone changed this? I don't know. DDS02, DDS0. This is
The
imported.
last update is of 21st Feb only, so
Okay, let me get my head around this. I think this is the final file. Radius 01. Let's look at the lineage of this. That is why it becomes very confusing. That is why it is
yeah,
always recommended you maintain these filters, right?
yeah.
Filters and appropriate naming conventions.
Mhm.
Okay, this is the right one. Okay, so the second purpose of a manage field stage is that it allows you to select fields and as well as view field changes. Select fields. When we say select fields, again, it is similar. So what we can say is, so let's open this first and edit. Okay, so right now, if you look at this data set, this is our final data set that we have created till now. It has a number of fields. It has, for example, these Workday ID fields. Now, initially, I had kept them because I wanted to use them for different referencing, right? Joins, and these were basically unique identifiers. But if you see, I don't need them anymore, right? Similarly, I have this parent company Workday ID, these load IDs as well. They were relevant to me probably earlier. Obviously, Workday automatically added these fields. I don't need them anymore, right? I have load IDs here as well. So I don't want to include any of these load ID fields, right? If I
Yeah.
can, right? So now I can use a manage field stage to handle all of this. Okay, so I'm clicking on add stage and manage field stage.
So we get the load timestamp date of each and every BDS in our final report.
Right, right. Because we are ultimately loading everything, right? BDS got imported
Mhm.
into DDS and DDS got imported into second DDS. So everything got imported. Now I actually don't need it, right? How we want
Uh,
to use it, that depends on our, our setup. So I don't want to use this anymore. I am unselecting this. I don't want to use these Workday IDs as well. I'm not interested. Again, I'm removing them, right? Similarly, where else do we have? We have load IDs. This is for the second BDS that we created. And
yes.
similarly, for the third BDS as well, if you see, we have load IDs and that's it. So the second purpose of manage field stage is in addition to editing your field names, field types, you can also select which fields would be included in your subsequent stage or excluded one stage, right? And I'm saying done. So the output of this stage is that now I have 33 fields. Let's see how many fields were there as the output of join stage. There were 41 fields.
Even, yeah.
All right. Okay. Now the third purpose. This is one of the most important. It allows us to view field changes. Now initially when we loaded our data, right, we loaded it through custom reports, through stocks, through an external file. Now this setup, once it is created, it system would continue to use these data sets, right? But over a period of time, maybe I have a requirement wherein I have to change the data source itself. In the custom report, let's say I want to include data for one more fields or 10 more fields. or in the stock grants file, maybe I want to include additional details. So what happens when your data source itself changes? Okay, so let's see. I currently have uh, company details, right? Or let's take worker details. So let's open this base data set. This base data set has been imported, right? So this base data set was created by importing a custom report, right? So if I go ahead and edit it, so this is what it is. This was my custom report and I simply imported it to create my base data set. When I imported it, Workday just added 2 extra fields. Everything is already there. Now let's say I go ahead and change my custom report. So what is my custom report? Let's go ahead and see our custom report. So it was ZF03 worker details. So this is my custom report. Oh, I didn't save the managed field.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that is fine. Okay, so this is my base data set. It has worker name, employee ID, worker type, supervisory org, which is basically coming from here. Worker name, employee ID, worker type, supervisory org, and so on and so forth. Now, I go ahead and I want to change my data source itself. So I'll come to the additional actions, custom report, and let me edit this report.
So we are now editing the actual custom report, right?
Actual custom report.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's say after employee ID, I want to add, let me say, uh, let's assume the age of the worker. I'm randomly selecting a field, right? I want to add age of the worker, right? And I'm saving this. So now my data source itself has changed, right? Which means the next time I import data into this data set, there would be a new field in that data source. The field which is not existing in my data set, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me add a manage field stage. So in this base data set, I'm adding a manage field stage, and I'm not doing anything in this stage. I'll simply add the manage field stage and say done. This is all I'm doing. All right. Okay, let me go back to my data set, the view mode. Oh. Continue, save. Okay,
What we have
I
done, we have added the age field in our
a custom report.
custom report, and then we have added a stage called as manage fields,
Manage field stage in our base data set.
base data
Okay,
set. Okay.
now let me go back to my data set. Here, I want to re-import data. Obviously, I'll have to keep re-importing data, right? Because if you see this data set, it includes my worker details. Now, new people will keep joining in my organization. So their data also has to be loaded, right?
Yes.
So now, after I created this data set on, let's say, 2 weeks back, and now I have hired 100 new people. Obviously, details of those 100 new people should also be included in my Prism setup. So now, this base data set, which already has data, which was loaded on, uh, when was it loaded? It was loaded on uh, February the 7th, and it's been 21 days. So obviously, we have hired new people. So I want to reload data, the latest data, right? In production system, you'll automatically set up an integration. What will that integration do? It will run on a daily or a weekly basis and automatically reload that data, right? Okay, so for now, I want to go to data set and I want to run that integration now.
Okay. So last time when we created this BDS, we selected run now. So
Right,
that's the reason the load timestamp is 7th Feb.
right. Right,
Okay.
right. Now when I rerun now, my load timestamp will obviously automatically change. So instead of running it now every time, what I can do is, as I discussed last time, I can edit the integration details and schedule it so that it
Okay.
automatically runs on a daily basis or whatever frequency I want to define. Okay, I'll talk about that later. For now, I just want to run it now on an ad hoc basis. I'm saying confirm. Okay. You have successfully started an integration run to bring data into the data set. I'll say done. Right. Let's refresh this. Let's go to the details and see what is the latest load timestamp. So now the load timestamp has changed, right? Because all these records, if you see, what are we doing? We are replacing. So all the existing records got replaced with the new records. Had we not
Yes.
replaced it, the existing records would have stayed the same, 7th of Feb, and then I would have new records from 27th of Feb. Okay, all right. Any which ways. Now, if you see, however, the problem is when I come here, it still doesn't show me that extra field that I added. So where did I add that extra field? After employee ID. But when I go to my base data set, it still shows the old structure, right? Let me go to edit. Now, when I go to edit, here under manage field stage, it shows me a warning. So if you see on the part stage, it shows me that a new field has been added, which is age, right? But on the
Yes.
manage field stage, it is not adding any fields. So the purpose of a manage field stage is that it allows you to view field changes. Any change that has happened in your data source, when you manage field stage, system would automatically show you that the schema has changed, a new field has been added, or an existing field has been removed. So the benefit of adding a manage field stage is that it allows you to see whether your data source itself has changed. Else, what will happen? You will schedule this integration in production. It will keep running, and no one will even notice that there has been some change in the data source, right? So now I know, looking at the warning, that the data source has changed. So it is therefore recommended that a manage field stage add a manage field stage at the beginning or in the base data set to identify any changes in the data source. So if I go here, now when I click on this warning, it will show me that there has been a schema change. So where is that schema change? It is here. So manage field stage would make sure that my subsequent systems wouldn't get impacted. So it will simply show me a warning and tell me that there is a schema change, and now I can decide whether I want to include this schema change or it was simply added by error. All right, so I decide, okay, this is valid and I want to include it, and I'll say done. Right, so any new field that gets added would always get added to the end.
Okay.
Make sense? Had I not
Yes.
added a manage field stage, I would not even have known. This data would then have got imported into the subsequent, and I would not even have known that my data source has changed. Maybe by mistake someone has changed the data source, right? Because you're getting data from third party systems,
Yep.
right? Okay, now the question is, how does Workday identify So how did Workday know that a field has changed and a field has been added? Okay, so Workday, it basically handles schema changes in the manage field stage based on the source file header row. So how did Workday identify that the schema has changed? Based on the columns. So for a custom report, what is the header row? Basically the headings, these XML aliases.
Yes.
Okay, so there are two scenarios. Maybe I'm reading the header row. For example, for a file, I'm not reading any of the header information. Okay, so if the source file has a header row, then what happens? Workday uses the field names in the header row to determine which fields have changed in the source. So it reads that header rows and then does that comparison. And this is why I mentioned earlier, once you have changed, once you have created a custom report and from there you have created a data set, then do not go ahead and use XML schemas, because it is these
Yes.
XML schemas that Workday uses. So if you see worker name, employee ID, worker types, so system uses these XML schemas,
So, is it
right?
necessary to add manage field as the stage?
Not necessary, but it is recommendation. So what we have added here, so if you see, we have not added manage field stage till now, but it was
Yes.
working perfectly fine. So it's a Workday recommendation that you add a manage field stage as the first stage of your data set.
Okay,
That way
because
you
if someone changes the data source or the fields, it won't
right,
impact our BDS or DDS.
exactly,
Okay.
right. Okay, so when your source file has header rows, because Workday does the comparison using the header rows, you can add or delete fields from anywhere in the source file. So if you see, I added a field right in the middle. What happens if the source file doesn't have a header row? So if the source file does not have a header row, then Workday only handles changes that occur at the end of the source file. Because here Workday has no way of determining which field has changed, right? So that is why it is always recommended whenever you create a data set, whether it is from a file from an SFTP server, always include the header rows, right? Because then later on management becomes easier. Okay, so the recommendation is you add manage field stage as the first stage in your data source. But also the recommendation is that add a manage fields stage as, as the final stage before a data set is published. So even before you're publishing a data set, when you publish a data set, then your data set becomes available for analysis. So again, the same logic. If there has been any changes anywhere in between, before publishing the dataset, you can quickly verify that everything is all right. So manage field stage is also recommended to be the final stage to be added before a dataset is to be published. All right. Again, this is a recommendation. So if you don't add it, that is perfectly fine. Now, what is the publishing a dataset? That is something we'll look at later. Make sense?
Yes.
Right. Okay. The next aspect of schema or the dataset schema. One second, excuse me. Okay. Now, what are the different field types that your datasets support? So, what is the dataset schema? The number of fields in that dataset or the columns in that dataset and the type of those columns or the field types. That is what defines a schema. So when I say a schema has changed, it could be that a new field has been added, a new column has been added, or the field type has changed. Okay, so what are the different field types that Workday supports? So what are the different dataset field types that Workday supports? Okay, the first field type that Workday supports is Boolean, right? Which is basically yes or no, right? In when I say Workday, Prism in Workday. As such, in custom report type called Boolean. If I go to a custom report or search for any field, you'll see that in terms of Workday reporting, they are all of different field types. So if I open here, this is a field of type text. Similarly, this is a field of type number. So this icon that I see here, this is a field of type numeric, right? Date of birth is a field of type date, right? So Workday reporting has different types of fields. This is a field of type currency. So what is a currency field? How is currency field different from a numeric field?
It gives us the dollar signs as well, the
Okay, yeah,
currency
the
sign.
currency values as well. So
Yeah.
Workday reporting always supported different field types, but Prism Analytics doesn't support all of them. So what are the field types that Prism Analytics support? The first one is Boolean, then it supports currency, then it supports date. Now Workday date field has both date and time, but Prism Analytics date field, it doesn't support that. We'll talk about that in a bit. Then it supports various numeric fields. So as usual, it has double, integer, uh, what else? Long and numeric. So these are the fold numeric fields that uh, Prism Analytics supports. Okay, and then we have text, instance, and multi-instance. I think we discussed about instance and multi-instance earlier, right?
Uh,
Okay, no problem. Let me run
yeah.
this report. So when I run this report, okay, if you see this, and let me also open this report definition in a separate tab. It's done. Let's save this. Okay, so this is my report output. This is my report definition, and this is my report output. So the first one, if you look at this icon T, so this identifies that this is a field of type text,
Text. Yeah.
right? And this is how text looks. This, on the other hand, is a field of type again text. This is a numeric field. Again, I see a numeric value. But let's look at the supervisory organization. And if I scroll to the right, let's look at vice president. If you see, these are all hyperlinks,
Yeah.
right? These are all
Yes.
not text fields. These are all instance fields. So if I go to the additional actions, or let's go in here, if you see, I can view the details or perform an action on these fields. So these are not simple text or numeric or date values. These are actual instances of data, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, supervisory org here, this is an instance field. So if I go to the additional actions, if you see, I can directly click on here and it will take me to the details of the supervisory org. I can also perform a number of actions. I can directly edit the supervisory org and so on and so forth. So these are all fields and this is the icon. This is a single instance field or an instance field.
Yeah.
So in Workday, we call it single instance. In dataset, we simply call it an instance field,
Okay.
right?
Even for
Now,
multi-instance, we call it as instance.
instance, we call it as multi-instance. So
Okay.
on the other hand, if I come to additional jobs, if you see, has a completely different icon. So this is a multi-instance field, right? So for example, a worker can only have one, let's say, gender, right? So while gender, if you see, is a single instance field, a worker cannot be both male and female, obviously,
Yes.
right? He would person would either be male or female or transgender or LGBTQ or so on. So this is a single instance field, which means a worker can only be associated with one gender value, whereas a worker can have multiple addresses, right? So address is a multi-instance field. So one to many relationship can exist between an address. Similarly, additional jobs, this is also a multi-instance field. So if I go to the actions, this is a multi-instance field because a worker can be performing multiple additional jobs, right? So in Workday, which when I say Workday in normal reporting, we have single instance, multi-instance. In Prism Analytics, we have multi-instance and instance. So single instance is simply known as an instance field, right? So if you see here, when I read report, a multi-instance field, it simply gets mapped to a multi-instance field in the base data set. So
Okay.
Workday automatically does this mapping. So any field of type text gets mapped to a field of type text. Any field of type date gets mapped to a field of type date. So Workday, because obviously it's a custom report, Workday automatically does that mapping. If I come to the details here, if you see A, this identifies that this is a text field. So if I click here, if you see Workday has automatically done this mapping. Whereas supervisory org, this is an instance field. Let's look at additional jobs. Additional jobs, if you see the icon, this is a multi-instance field. So Workday automatically does this mapping between the custom reports and the base data sets, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Now, with respect to currency, or I'll talk about currency in just a bit. So this is how Workday does the mapping. So mapping between custom reports and base data sets. And this is pretty straightforward, right? So anything which is stored as a boolean in a custom report is mapped to a boolean in dataset. So what is a boolean? Boolean is a field of type yes or no or true or false.
Yes. True or false. Yeah.
Okay, anything which is of type text obviously gets mapped to text in base dataset. Now, in addition to text, Workday reporting also has something called a rich text. However, rich text is not supported. What is rich text? Wherein if you see, you can do some formatting. If you remember, so for example, if I can, when I create job profiles or when I enter some comments, I can make them bold and add hyphens and all of that. So
Yes.
Workday reporting supports rich text, but Prism Analytics doesn't support rich text. Okay, the second field it doesn't support. Date, as I mentioned, is supported. So date gets mapped to date, but
So if our workday report has the rich text, so will when creating a base data set, that rich text will be available in PDS or not?
it will all appear as null blank.
Okay.
Okay, so date time zone is not supported. So basically, only these two field types are not supported. One is, I'll not add others because they are all self-explanatory.
Yes.
So only date time zone. Only simple date is supported, but we know that many date fields they also come with time zone. They are not supported. With respect to currency, you can have any kind of currency field, not just for custom report but external data as well, as long as the currency field has a code. So that is why when we created our custom report initially, where is it? One of the prerequisites is show currency column should be checked. So this is how Prism Analytics identify that this is a field of type currency. So for with respect to currency, any of these formats are supported. So for example, you can say 300.00 US dollars, or maybe you can say USD 300, right? Or maybe you can say 3000 USD. So Workday would take any combination of these fields as long as there is this currency code USD. Make sense? Or maybe you want
Yes. No,
this
no,
way,
got it.
any of these formats are supported with a comma, without comma, as long as there is a currency code value. Okay, there's another concept as well, which is null values. Now, where I mentioned Workday is not able to identify a relevant field type, or basically data itself is not available, Workday simply shows a null value there. So wherever either data is not available, let's see, do we have data unavailable somewhere?
There was a column
You can see.
where it,
Okay, perfect. Now, whenever Workday come across some field wherein there's no data, when I run this report, in in reporting there's no concept of a null field. So in Workday there's no concept of a null field. Wherever there's no data, Workday simply shows blank output. So if I run this report, let me run this and scroll to the right. If you see, there's no concept of a null field in Workday, right? Either there is
yes,
data or there's no data. But the same data, when it is brought into my data set, if you see, Workday replaces all blank values with null, right?
yes.
Or wherever it's not able to identify the data, which is not in the right format, let's say rich text, again, Workday replaces it with null. right? So wherever Workday is not able to identify the data format, now there is two things that is happening. The first thing is I'm bringing in data from custom report into data set, right? This I'm then modifying, transforming maybe through my base data set. I brought this data into BDS. From this BDS, this went into, let's say, my DDS1. From there, it went into my DDS2, and so on and so forth. Finally, I go ahead and publish my data set, which becomes my PDS,
Yep.
right? Now, when I publish my data set in Workday reporting, if I go back to my report and open the details, all reporting in Workday happens through something called a data source. So if you see, all reporting in Workday happens through a data source. This is what is used for all reporting in Workday. Okay, so once again, my initial data was in custom report, it was in some non-Workday data, it was in files, it was in SFTP server, whatever. I brought all of that data into different base data sets. From there, I transform the data. And finally, once my data is transformed, I finally publish the data. Once I publish my data, Workday creates a data source once again, right? Now, once my data source is created, this is known as a Prism data source.
Okay.
Now, once my
So
Prism data source is
altogether, a new
created,
data source gets created.
correct. This I can now use for my reporting. Ultimately, what is the purpose of my Prism Analytics? So that I can bring data from different sources. I can blend and transform and modify the data. And then that data, ultimately, how will I visualize the data? In my data set, there could be millions of records. So that data is again visualized and understood with the help of different reports, right? So ultimately, when you publish the data, Workday again creates a complete new data source, which is referred to as Prism data source. And that data source is again used for reporting. So if you see here, initially when we got some blank values, it added null to it, right? Because here
Yes.
Workday deals with null. But ultimately, finally, when we do reporting once again, in reporting, there's no concept of a null, right? So this is what Workday does. Anything which is null in the published data set, based on the field type, Workday again does this conversion. Okay, so what is the idea? In Workday reporting, which is basically data source, there is no concept of a null value, right? So when a data set is published, which is basically my published data set, Workday replaces all null values in the data source. So if I see here in my base data set, in my derived data set, here, I have null values. Ultimately, my data set, my derived data set, Workday would again replace all null values. Now, how does that replacement happens? That replacement happens. So if you see initially, this is my base data set. It has null values. That base data set would then flow into derived data set. It will then flow here. So this data set also has null values. When I finally publish it, it will create a data source,
Okay.
right? Now again, in that data source, null values have to be replaced. Now, how are they replaced? So if there is a null value in a Boolean field, then it is replaced with false, right? If there is a null value in a currency field, then it is replaced with 0. If it is null value in a numeric field or a currency field or a long field, then again it is replaced with field.
Is it something that we do in normal workday reporting? Show no when empty.
That is a different concept. That is only display purpose,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
right? You're talking about the options, right? Show no when
Yes. Yes.
empty.
Options. Yes.
In Workday, again, things could be empty. So for here, additional jobs, it is empty, right?
Yes.
But age could be empty, but age could be zero. These are two different things.
Yes. Got
Age
it.
is empty when I have not entered my date of birth, but my age is zero when I'm just born, right? My age is less than 1 year. Then system would calculate age to be zero. If you create a
Yes.
date calculation. So any value which is numeric and there any null exists. So again, if I go, let's look at this final data set. I'm not sure if there would be any values, but let's go ahead and check. So if I go ahead and publish this data set, the data source that gets created, this is how all null values are dealt. So numeric becomes changed with zero. If there is an instance field or a text field or a multi-instance field and there is null in it, it is all replaced with blank values. So if you see additional, it is an instance field. So if I come here, so whatever null values come in this, it will all be replaced with zero. It will all be replaced with zero. If you see, there is a
Okay.
null value here. We
Yes.
just saw it, right?
It went up.
It went up, yeah. So any which ways. So this, because this is a numeric field, if there are any null values here, this null value in the data source which gets created, it will be replaced with zero. Why? Because this is a numeric field.
Numeric. So
Supervisory
according to the
org,
data type, it will give us the data.
right,
I mean, zero or false.
right,
Okay.
right. Because this is an instance supervisory org, here it will be replaced with a blank value.
Okay.
All right. So any null values will be replaced in the final. So if you see two-way conversion is happening. Initially, when there was no values in my custom report, those no values became replaced with null, right? Finally, when I convert this data source and publish it, then again, these null values will be replaced with blank or zero or false based on the field type. Okay.